Previously, I told you how I gave everything I had, my time, my health, even my peace of mind, to care for them. I told you how, after months of sacrifice, I stood at their door, only to hear the words, "We don't need you anymore," before the door slammed shut in my face. But that was not the end of the story. No, that moment was only the beginning of a heartbreak far deeper than I ever imagined. And if you think it couldn't get worse, if you think kindness, once rejected, at least leaves behind respect, then listen carefully. Because what happened next left scars that I carry to this very day. The night after they pushed me away, I sat in silence, the sound of that slamming door echoing in my mind over and over again. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. My hands trembled as I tried to pour tea, and the cup shattered on the floor. I remember kneeling there, picking up the pieces one by one, and whispering to myself, after all I did, after all I gave, why? The following days were emptier than any I had known. For so long, my life had revolved around them. Every morning had a purpose: cooking, cleaning, helping, caring. Now, I woke to silence. My house felt colder, my rooms too big. The garden, wild and overgrown, seemed almost foreign to me, as though it belonged to someone else. But worse than the emptiness was the shame. When I walked to the market, neighbors looked at me strangely. Some avoided my eyes. Others whispered when I passed. I didn't know what they had been told, but I felt it. The shift, the judgment. Where once they had pitied me, now they seemed to mock me with their silence. I tried once to visit again. I told myself maybe she had spoken in anger, maybe grief had twisted her words. I baked a loaf of bread, wrapped it in a cloth, and carried it across the street. My hand shook as I knocked. No one answered. I waited, listening. I could hear movement inside, a chair scraping, the faint cough I knew too well. But the door remained shut. I knocked again, a little harder. My voice cracked as I called out, "It's me. I just brought you something to eat." Still nothing. Finally, I heard her voice from behind the door. Cold, distant. "Please don't come back." The bread slipped from my hands. I stumbled back, tears burning my eyes, and for the first time in months, I felt truly alone. I don't know what hurt more, that they no longer needed me, or that they wanted me erased, as though my presence had never mattered at all. And here, dear listener, I want to pause for a moment, because I need to ask you something. Have you ever given your all to someone, your time, your heart, your very soul, only to be cast aside, forgotten, or even blamed? If you have, I want you to write in the comments below. Share your story. Tell me if you've ever stood outside a door, feeling it close against you when you needed it open the most. Your words matter, not just to me, but to everyone who listens here. So please, don't stay silent. After that day, I tried to rebuild my life. I tended to my garden again, though my hands were weak. I sat by the window with my books, but I could never concentrate. Every sound from across the street, the creak of their door, the murmur of voices, pulled me back into the ache of rejection. Then came the cruelty I did not expect. One morning, while walking back from the market, I overheard two women talking at the corner. They didn't see me at first. She never left their house, one said. No wonder they told her to go. Some people don't know how to keep boundaries. The other chuckled. They said she only helped so she could get something out of it. Imagine, hovering like that, waiting for scraps. My heart dropped. I stepped into view, and they fell silent, their faces guilty. But it was too late. I had heard every word. That's when I realized. They weren't just shutting me out of their home. They were rewriting the story of everything I had done. The kindness I gave had been twisted into suspicion. The sacrifices I made were being spoken of as selfishness. And the people around me, neighbors I had known for decades, were beginning to believe it. I walked home that day with my basket heavier than ever, though it carried nothing but bread and onions. Heavier because I knew my reputation, my dignity, was being stripped away piece by piece. And as much as I wanted to believe it would stop, that people would see the truth, deep down I knew. The worst was still to come. The days blurred into one another. I no longer crossed the street to their house, no longer carried soup or bread in my hands. But my eyes, my heart, never stopped watching. Their curtains were often drawn now, the rooms beyond them shadowed and silent. Sometimes, late at night, I would see the faint glow of a lamp and hear his coughing drift through the still air. It tore at me, knowing I was just a few steps away yet completely unwelcome. I told myself I should let go, that it wasn't my place anymore. But my body betrayed me. My feet carried me to the window, to the porch, to the edge of the street, searching for any sign of life. Then, one evening, I saw her. She stepped outside, shoulders hunched, her face pale under the porch light. She looked older, thinner, as if the weight of her husband's suffering had carved years into her skin. She stood there for a moment, staring at the ground, and then she noticed me watching. Her eyes hardened instantly. Without a word, she turned back inside and shut the door. That look, so cold, so final, burned into me. Still, I couldn't stop caring. It's strange, isn't it? To be pushed away, humiliated, and yet your heart still aches for the very people who hurt you. A week later, I heard the sound that shattered me. It was past midnight. The wind rattled my windows, and then came a cry. A woman's cry, piercing, desperate. It was her. I rushed to my door, my hands trembling on the handle. But I stopped myself. She had told me not to come back. So I stood there, frozen, listening as her sobs echoed through the night. They rose and fell, mixed with his weak, rasping coughs that grew fainter with every minute. I pressed my hand against the door frame, whispering a prayer, begging God to give him peace. The next morning, I saw a doctor's carriage outside their home. My stomach turned. I watched from behind my curtain as he entered, carrying his black bag. An hour later, he left, his face grave, his eyes avoiding mine. She followed him to the gate, her steps slow, her face streaked with tears. I wanted to cross the street, to hold her, to tell her she wasn't alone. But her words from before echoed in my mind. Please don't come back. So I stayed where I was, my hands gripping the windowsill until my knuckles turned white. For the next few days, the house was almost silent. The only sounds were muffled footsteps, the occasional creak of a chair, and then, one evening, I heard it, the stillness, the kind of silence that settles when a voice has been taken from the world forever. I didn't need anyone to tell me. I knew he was gone. My chest tightened, tears spilling down my face. I had been there for every stage of his suffering, every cough, every fever, every restless night. And yet, in his final moments, I was nothing but a stranger outside their door. The next morning, people began arriving. Relatives I had never seen before filled their house. They brought flowers, food, voices that buzzed with false sympathy. I stood at my window, watching. No one looked toward me, no one waved. I was invisible. When the funeral procession passed down the street, I stayed on my porch. I wanted to walk behind them, to pay my respects, but I didn't dare. My presence would have been unwelcome, maybe even resented. So I stood alone, tears sliding down my cheeks as the coffin passed by, carried by hands that had not been there in the long nights when he needed them most. And then I saw her. She walked behind the coffin, her face hard, her eyes set straight ahead. Not once did she glance toward me, not even once. That cut deeper than any words, because in that moment it was clear I was no longer part of their story. Not as a neighbor, not as a friend, not even as a memory. But the cruelty did not end there, because soon I would discover that my name, my kindness, my sacrifices, had been spoken of in ways that twisted the truth into poison. And that was when the betrayal truly began. In the days after his funeral, I thought perhaps the silence would lift, that maybe, with grief heavy in her heart, she might soften and remember the months I had stood beside her. I hoped she would knock on my door, even just once, and say, "Thank you for everything." But the knock never came. Instead, whispers began to reach me. At first, faint, like a murmur carried by the wind. Then louder, clearer, impossible to ignore. One morning, I walked to the bakery, basket in hand. As I entered, two women fell silent, their eyes fixed on me. I greeted them softly, but they only nodded and turned away, their faces stiff. While I waited for my loaf of bread, I overheard their hushed voices. They say she was always there, watching, waiting, like she wanted something. Imagine lingering around someone's dying husband like that. No shame. The words struck me like stones. My hands shook as I paid, the coins clattering on the counter. I hurried home, my heart pounding. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing their voices, replaying every moment I had spent in that house. Had my kindness been mistaken for intrusion? Or had someone twisted my intentions deliberately? The answer came sooner than I expected. A neighbor, one I had known for decades, came to visit me the following week. She sat stiffly in my kitchen, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She hesitated before speaking. "I don't know if I should tell you this, but people are saying things, that you only helped them because you hoped for money or a place in their will." I gasped, covering my mouth with trembling hands. "No, that's not true. I never asked for anything." She nodded quickly. I know. I told them it couldn't be true. But it was her who said it. His wife. She told her relatives you were always around, too much, and that it felt like you were waiting for something in return. I felt the blood drain from my face. Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. She had said this, the very woman who had clung to me in her darkest hours, who had leaned on me when she couldn't bear the weight alone. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, but my throat closed, my voice barely a whisper. I only wanted to help. After she left, I sat in the silence of my kitchen for hours, the ticking clock the only sound. My heart ached, my body felt heavy, and I wondered how kindness could so easily be turned into suspicion. In the weeks that followed, the whispers grew louder. At the market, I felt eyes on me. At church, the pews around me seemed colder, people shifting away slightly. I was no longer the woman who had given her time and strength. I was a figure of gossip, someone to be pitied, or worse, distrusted. Once, as I walked home, a child ran past me, laughing. His mother pulled him close, muttering, "Don't go near her." My chest tightened. What had I become in their eyes? A helper, a neighbor, or a shadow to be feared? Still, despite the shame, I couldn't stop thinking of her. I remembered her tears, her exhaustion, the way she had once clutched my hand and whispered, "Thank you." Had all of that been a lie? Or had grief twisted her so deeply that she had turned me into her enemy? I may never know the answer. All I know is that the kindness I gave, every sleepless night, every aching bone, every sacrifice, had been erased, rewritten into a story where I was the intruder, the opportunist, the villain. And the worst part, no one questioned it, because when someone slams a door in your face, it's not just to keep you out. Sometimes it's to lock you away in the shadows of a story you never chose to be part of. But even then, the cruelest chapter was still waiting to be written. The summer heat pressed heavily on the town, but inside me there was only a chill that never left. Each day felt the same, neighbors' glances, whispers trailing behind me, the weight of a name I no longer recognized. I tried to live quietly, tend in my small garden, sew in torn clothes, walking slowly to the market. But wherever I went, the silence of others followed. Then one afternoon, as I returned from the market with a loaf of bread and some onions, I heard laughter from across the street. Her porch was filled with people, relatives who had not been there during his illness, neighbors who had never once offered help. They sat drinking tea, their voices carrying through the air. I froze when I heard my name. She wouldn't leave them alone, someone said, chuckling, always hanging around, as if she expected to be part of the family. Another voice joined in. I heard she thought they'd put her in the will. Can you imagine? The nerve. And then her voice, the one I knew so well, the voice I had trusted in countless late-night hours. Calm, steady, almost amused. She meant well, but it was too much. I had to put a stop to it. People like that, they don't know their place. My hands trembled so violently that the bread slipped from my basket and fell into the dust. I stood there in the street, my heart pounding so loudly I thought they might hear it. Every word struck me like a blade. She had not only shut me out, she had turned me into a story, a warning, a joke for others to share. I bent to pick up the bread, my vision blurred with tears. For a moment I wanted to shout, to march across that street and demand she speak the truth. But my body felt heavy, my throat tight. I couldn't. I knew if I tried, they would only laugh louder, or worse, pity me. That evening, as the sun set, I sat by my window and watched the light fade from her house. I remembered all the nights I had sat at that very window, praying for him to survive just one more day, rushing across the street when she called for help. And now I was nothing but a shadow in their story, twisted into something unrecognizable. Days turned into weeks. The whispers no longer shocked me. They dulled into a constant ache. But one Sunday after church, the ache cut deeper. The priest, a man I had known for years, approached me gently. His eyes were kind, but his words carried the weight of the rumors. "My dear," he said softly, "perhaps in the future it would be wise to keep a little more distance. People misunderstand." Misunderstand. That word. It was as if my entire life had been reduced to a mistake, a misstep, a misinterpretation. I walked home slowly, my knees aching, my heart heavier than it had ever been. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask someone, anyone, to see the truth. But no one did. No one wanted to. By the time autumn winds began to sweep through the streets, I was a ghost in my own neighborhood. Children whispered about me, neighbors avoided me, and even at the market, my presence made conversations pause. And then, one evening, it happened. I had gone outside to bring in the laundry when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw two young men, relatives of hers, standing at my gate. Their expressions were smug, their voices dripping with disdain. "You should have stayed in your own house," one of them said. "You embarrassed her. Everyone knows what you were after," the other sneered. I wanted to protest, to tell them they were wrong. But the words caught in my throat. I simply stood there, gripping the basket in my hands, feeling smaller than I had ever felt before. Finally, they laughed and walked away, leaving me trembling in the fading light. I went inside and shut the door, my chest aching. That night, I sat alone in the dark and whispered to myself, maybe I really was a fool. Maybe kindness was my mistake. But deep down, I knew the truth. Kindness was not the mistake. Trust was. And yet, the cruelest wound had not yet been struck. Because soon, I would learn something that would not only break my heart, but shatter the last piece of peace I had left. Something that would make me realize the betrayal ran far deeper than I ever imagined.